Welcome to the Bitcoin Source, your go-to hub for all things Bitcoin. I'm your host, Dadu, and today we're excited to introduce James Wong, former pharmacist turned dedicated Bitcoin entrepreneur. James advocates that drug rebates benefit everyone in the industry except customers paying out of pocket. To address this issue, Nihowdy was created to pass drug rebates back to customers. James strongly believes that Bitcoin, when used as a rebate, can alleviate out-of-pocket prescription costs. Welcome to the show today, James.
Thanks, Dottie, for having me. Really huge pleasure being here today.
Yes, sir. And James, this is your first time on, so like I want to start in the beginning, kind of like your origins and vision of your company. So, James, can you share the story behind the inception of Nihowdy and what was the pivotal moment that made you realize Bitcoin could be a solution to the high out-of-pocket prescription expenses?
Sure. To begin, I am a pharmacist. I've owned pharmacies, skilled nursing facilities. I am not naive to the business of healthcare. It's incredibly disgusting. It's dirty. One thing I noticed during my tenure of being a pharmacist, I noticed that drug rebates, they benefit every single stakeholder in the industry, but they never ever go back directly to the consumer. I look at GoodRx, a publicly traded company, makes roughly about 500 to 800 million on out-of-pocket prescription costs every single year. I look at that and say that's absolutely disgusting how much transaction fees and rebates they make. I looked at passing back drug rebates to customers and I said, Bitcoin's a great tool for doing this. If you purchase like a $10 drug through us, your rebate's about 3%. How do I give you 30 cents back today in today's financial system? It's impossible. If I were to mail you a check, postage and handling is already 60 cents. As a business, I can't Venmo you 30 cents. It costs a business a quarter to $1.50. So with Bitcoin, obviously it's not cost prohibitive. If you're paying people out on the Lightning Network, the transaction fee is like a thousandth percent. But I think what's really cool is Bitcoin's an asset. Yes, it's speculative. It's still emerging technology. But I have this vision in the future where Bitcoin can be used to offset prescription costs. So that's kind of, our North Star in terms of what we're doing here.
100%. I think that that's such a dope way to kind of approach just pharmacy. Like when I think of a pharmacist, like I never think of a Bitcoiner, right? So like that's kind of what really drew me into like talking to you because I just saw your profile on LinkedIn and I was like, who is this guy? Like a pharmacist that's into Bitcoin? Like you would never think because pharmacists are generally pretty successful. They're like really happy with their fiat paycheck, you know what I mean? So like to hear you like kind of be sickened about prescriptions and drug rebates and how the insurance companies kind of make way more money off the top than the customer does. I think that is very like telling that you've realized to create a solution through Nihowdy to do that. It's
Yeah,
dope.
I can tell you the business is quite disgusting. We all pay taxes into Medicare. Medicare gets to negotiate drug pricing, but it's only for people who are 65 and older. What really baffles me is, we all pay into the system, but the drug negotiations don't happen for everybody. That's kind of shocking to me. So I look at it and say, look, Medicare, it's an entitlement program. People will eventually be covered on Medicare in the future, but through technological advances, new therapies, new drugs that come out, the program's going to get more and more expensive. And that means tax revenue has to increase. I just don't see it as a sustainable model with fiat, unfortunately.
100%. And I really want to talk about that. That kind of makes me think about something else, which is like the customer impact, right? So you've mentioned reaching over 250 customers since your launch, and I think your company's been around a little bit over 2 years now. Can you share a few stories about how Nihowdy has impacted their lives, especially in the terms of financial relief and access to medication?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we actually started reviewing some of our data. We've had Howdy launched since I would say March of 2023. So at that time, we've been rebating back Bitcoin when it was about 20,000. Right now, I think at time if we're talking right now, it's about 51 to 52,000. So it's pretty cool to at least for our customers to see like, oh wow, this has covered maybe about 8% of the purchase price of our medication. I think our big milestone is going to be 10%. I think when Bitcoin hits 71 or 72,000, some of our customers will have effectively been able to offset their prescription cost by 10% or 10% at that point in time. So I think what's really cool is a lot of our customers, they were very speculative about Bitcoin, but I think a lot of them are turning to this idea of like, hey, this might be a really cool tool to solve out-of-pocket prescription costs. The government can't even solve out-of-pocket prescription costs. So I think Bitcoin is, a great avenue for doing that.
Hey there, fellow Bitcoin enthusiasts. We just wanted to take a moment to appreciate you for tuning in to the Bitcoin Source, a Bitcoin conversation. Your support means the world to us as we dive into the exciting world of Bitcoin, blockchain, and all things cryptocurrency. If you've been enjoying our content, don't forget to hit that like button. It's like a virtual high five that keeps us motivated. And hey, sharing is caring. If you know someone who'd geek out over Bitcoin as much as we do, hit that share button. Finally, if you want to stay up to date with all our latest episodes and insights, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single update. Thanks for being a part of our community. Keep exploring, and remember, the future is decentralized. Now back to the episode.
Yes, I would agree with that. I forgot the name of the company. I think it's Crowd Health. Like they do something similar, but I don't know if they do things particularly on the prescription drug rebate side of things. So like when I heard about your company, I was like, oh, okay, this kind of sounds familiar, but I actually had to Google what a drug rebate was, which is crazy. Thank God I'm like relatively healthy and I don't take any like constant medication on a daily basis. So like maybe I'm not in the know about this, but when I did Google it and read up what a drug rebate was, I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense that like arbitrage this into Bitcoin. Like I don't know why someone hasn't done it sooner, right? And when I think about like the future of the pharmaceutical companies and Bitcoin, I think that you're in a very unique position to kind of like change the narrative about what drug prescriptions look like and just like kind of the medical establishment in the country as a whole. Like I think that a lot of medical companies and drug companies have been incentivized to kind of just create drugs so that they can make profit and not necessarily like heal people or get people to be in a place where they're actually keeping their conditions at bay. So, I always have to commend you, James, for kind of like doing something that I think is super unorthodox. And I remember telling you off air that like being a Bitcoiner, you're definitely like a radical. And I think that you're now a radical to the pharmaceutical company. So I think a lot of people will enjoy this interview and learn a few things from this conversation.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a very disgusting industry, in my opinion. Again, everybody gets drug rebates in the industry, but it never goes back to the customer. What I usually tell people who are interested in using a prescription savings card is, what is the benefit there? How much are they going to save you off the register at the very beginning? They do make all these transaction fees and rebates on the back end that they just don't tell you about. And you could look up our competitors. They are a publicly traded company. You can see their financial statements and you'll be shocked. They clear roughly about 500 to 800 million annually, just all based on out-of-pocket prescription costs. So what I usually tell people is like, look, you can take these rebates for yourself or they're going to eventually get passed back to the shareholders of a publicly traded company. It's really your decision. You get to vote with your money. So I personally, in my opinion, I think Bitcoin can solve out-of-pocket prescription costs. I think it's just a wonderful thing. We live in a fiat system where your purchasing power just decreases on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, annually basis. I think giving Bitcoin to no coiners or just people who need medications in general is just a great way to onboard the mass.
And James, given your unique position at the intersection of Bitcoin and pharmaceuticals, where do you see the future of this relationship headed? Do you believe more companies will follow in Nihowdy's footsteps?
Great question. So I can tell you a little bit about us. We work with over 35,000 pharmacies in our network right now. We're going to actually be expanding that offering to 70,000 later this year. So we should be at almost every pharmacy in America, which is pretty cool. Our second product line that we're releasing, it's going to be called Nihowdy. And as you can imagine, it's a play on words. So it's going to be drug rebates for pet prescriptions. We're also working with a few competitors of Mark Cuban to basically do an exclusivity contract for mail order so we can lower our rates even more. I don't really have a crystal ball in terms of like what's going to happen to this industry, but I can kind of give you some insight from talking to a lot of publicly traded companies about our product. A lot of them do not want to touch Bitcoin. A lot of them see it as very volatile, and usually these mature companies, they already have steady income. The steady revenue, they don't want to do anything that's too risky to mess that up. One of these publicly traded companies, I'm sure you shop there at least once a month. We were about to sign an exclusivity agreement with them, but the CEO actually came out and said, hey, I would love to work with you, but the problem is if Bitcoin goes to zero, which you can't promise me, I'm going to get fired from my job. The board of directors will vote me out, or share prices will go down. And it was a light bulb moment in my mind. It was like, well, we're still very early with Bitcoin. For other entrepreneurs who want to develop some sort of payment system, or just do some sort of like business that is integrating Bitcoin within their own industry, we're still very, very early, in my opinion. But I think this is the right time to build. But yeah, I can tell you it'll be interesting to see what the future holds, I think, for healthcare, and what the narrative will be for Bitcoin.
Talking about being early, I always think about like the regulatory landscape of Bitcoin and the crypto space and the blockchain space, and navigating the regulatory environment of both Bitcoin and pharmaceuticals must be super complex. And because you're a pharmacist, you're kind of in the know about this stuff. How has Nihowdy addressed those challenges if they have already? And what does the regulatory future look like for your business model?
That's a great question. I can tell you there was a lot of legal hurdles to overcome. As you know, there's what I would say the blockchain or Bitcoin sort of industry. Is this legal or permissible? Is this considered security, a commodity, or is this its own asset class? If you're in the business of giving Bitcoin as a business, you need a money transmitter license, and that's incredibly cost prohibitive because you need one for every state that you operate in. We operate in all 50 states. On the pharmacy side, I can tell you there's definitely a lot of regulation, particularly if you're a pharmacy that participates in a Medicaid or Medicare program, which is like everyone. It gets very, very tricky. One thing I sort of mentioned in the very beginning was like, I'm not naive to the business of healthcare. There are a lot of government payers that pay out fiat dollars to these participating pharmacy providers, and there's usually conditions or covenants when you receive those funds. For example, you would agree to audits that are frequent to your business, or you may agree that your employees have to be a certain wage. But if I do believe that Bitcoin has this huge impact on healthcare or the pharmaceutical industry, I could see in the future where government payers say, hey, pharmacies or providers, if you're working with Bitcoin, there's effectively a ban on owning digital assets, or there's effectively possibly a reduction in payment if you were to work with Bitcoin. I could see that as a challenge in the future, but again, I don't have a crystal ball. I do believe Bitcoin's incredibly disruptive to the U.S. government. And, if you look at healthcare, it's completely subsidized by the U.S. taxpayer. It's always going to be paid out in fiat dollars. Typically, payers don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, and I do see that as a problem in the future. But we're not there yet right now.
And that makes me think about Americans or just people all over the world that just have chronic diseases that things that require them to kind of have medication on a daily basis, a diabetic, for example, or someone that has IBS or some disease that kind of requires them to always have medication on a monthly basis or whatever. I always think about it from the perspective of you work a job, you pay taxes, and you also pay for health insurance, which is usually a large chunk of your paycheck coming out. And then on the flip side, you have like those little pharmacy cards that you get, whether it's an Osco card or Walgreens or something, and then you pay for your medication. The insurance covers some of it, but depending on what you have, if you're an asthmatic or something, your inhaler might be $10, but it really costs you 70 if you didn't have insurance. I always think about like, how do companies profit off of that? How do they make money off of that? And it's like, if we could kind of intertwine Bitcoin into that conversation, would it be a lot cheaper if you just paid in Satoshis, right? So that's why I always wanted to pick your brain on a lot of these topics, James, because I think that as we move into the future and we start to see, I mean, naturally, when you look at just the overall health of Americans, it's not that great. And it's kind of crazy to say this, but I feel like the pharmaceutical company is going to continue to boom, at least into the near future, because you have so many sick people that don't really take care of their health. And then on top of that, to magnify it, it's super expensive. So how do we find a solution to that? And I think that Nihowdy has been kind of ushered into the universe to get us into that place for sure.
Sure. The insight I can actually give you, you mentioned sort of like looking forward, what's this going to look like for a lot of Americans, and how is it going to affect their prescriptions? There was something called the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by Congress, I'm going to say about a couple years ago now. It basically gives Medicare which is for 65-year-olds and older, the power to renegotiate drug prices. They were basically going to take 10 drugs every single quarter for the next 10 years and basically tell pharmaceutical companies, we're going to pay you about 20 to 30% less. Now, for a taxpayer, you're like, oh, that's great. That's amazing. We're going to pay a little less on this. But what a lot of people don't see is these pharmaceutical companies, they're not going to take a loss on their balance sheet or on their profit and loss statement. What they're going to end up doing is they're going to reduce their rebates that go to every state program, which is Medicaid, and to every large employer. So what's going to end up happening is that a lot of people who are in the working class, they're going to have to pay a higher deductible, higher copay, a higher share of cost, or their drug just might not be covered anymore. And the reality is everyone's going to need a medication once in their life, whether they have a cold, flu, maybe they're sick, maybe they have diabetes, whatever it is. I do see this reality in the next 5 to 10 years where people are going to say, look, it doesn't make sense for me to keep paying these high premiums when I could just pay for these medications out of pocket myself. And that's kind of where we're gearing up and saying, look, people are going to have to pay for medications out of pocket. We're going to try to negotiate this for the cheapest rate that's possible, but we're also going to give them a drug rebate in the back end that they normally would have never received in the first place.
Yeah, I think that that's super smart. And is there any specific markets or demographics you aim to reach with Nihowdy? And are there any strategies that you will employ to expand your customer base?
It's a great question. I think so for medications, it's all over the place. Typically, older people will need medications more so than younger ones. But sort of in our initial customer batch, the demographics, it's been all over the place, all ages, definitely in all different types of states and all different types of zip codes. So it's really hard for us to say, who is our ideal customer right now. Ideally, it's just you need medications, whether you want Bitcoin as a rebate or not. That's the second discussion. We're going to actually be going through the fundraising motion actually next quarter. I do believe we have a very solid product that fits a very niche need. And I think Bitcoin, again, can solve out-of-pocket prescription costs. We're sort of what I'd say tapped out on resources. I've been self-funding and bootstrapping this company. So we're excited to actually start fundraising this coming quarter with venture capital.
Yeah, that's dope. I'm looking forward to that, and I'll definitely keep my ears to the concrete to see what Nihowdy is doing, and hopefully I can share some of your content or obviously use this episode to kind of push the narrative that people need to support great entrepreneurs and great Bitcoin companies that are trying to really cause solutions and give people changes in their lives that will benefit them, because there's tons of stuff around Bitcoin now with the ETFs and people making money and the price going up and the halvening coming. And I always look during these type of epochs or cycles to see, okay, what are people really building? Like, are they really trying to use Bitcoin as a conduit to really make change, or are people just trying to make money? And like I said before, when I saw your story, I was super excited to talk to you on the Bitcoin source, because I just love to see when people kind of jump out of the box and do things that are unorthodox and are radical, because you could have easily just stayed a pharmacist, made great money, and just let the industry continue to do what it does. And for you to jump out there and just be doing something different is always commendable. And I would love to hear like some of your insight or advice for entrepreneurs. So I definitely have a question in regards to that.
Yeah. So advice for, I guess, entrepreneurs. I think it'd be kind of disingenuous for me to give advice to people who are outside of the healthcare ecosystem. So I think my advice be more for healthcare entrepreneurs, but you have to be really, really hyper focused on who your customer is. What I mean by that is a lot of healthcare entrepreneurs, they'll approach me. They've built a really cool product. They've built a really amazing service, but the problem is they can't get anyone to pay for it. In healthcare, a lot of the payers have what we call vertically integrated businesses. So let's take United Health Group, for example. They own medical practices, they own hospitals, they own the pharmacies. Anytime there's an outflow of medical dollars going outside of their own ecosystem into, say, another business or an entrepreneur, they'll make it very difficult for them to do business and survive. A lot of new technologies actually will increase the cost of healthcare. Medicare, actually, in their trustee report, when they do their solvency checks every single year, one of the things they say is every time new technologies, new therapies come out, it makes the system much more expensive rather than less expensive. So what I usually tell, again, a lot of healthcare entrepreneurs is like, be very, very hyper focused on who your paying customers are, because your ideal customer might not be the one who's going to be able to pay for this. I think you could probably extrapolate my advice to your other, to other industries and just say, look, be very hyper focused on who's your paying customer and be very cognizant of what like who that is.
Yes, I think that that's a smart way to approach it, and hopefully, a lot of entrepreneurs out there will really take that advice and find ways to build better things and to make things even cooler than they already are. Um, I always think about the community and the support of the community. And when you're building a venture like Nihowdy, which requires not only just a vision, but also community support, how has the community, both online and offline, contributed to your success, and how do you engage with your supporters?
I think our most vocal supporters are actually the pharmacists and healthcare providers. A lot of them, they see the value of Bitcoin, so they get it right away. And it's them trying to tell their patients, what are the therapies, what are the drugs out there, but what's the most economically feasible way of obtaining those things. And they typically talk about Nihowdy. It's been really cool. I've had a lot of pro Bitcoiner pharmacists reach out to me and just talk about, well, this is such a cool idea that you're doing. But yeah, I mean, typically, if people wanted to find out more about Nihowdy, they could reach me on LinkedIn. I'm my DMs are always open. You could also find me on Twitter. My handle is The Simple Doctor. Our website is nihowdy.com, spelled NIHODWOWDY.
Nice, nice. Thank you for that, James. James, a few more questions. So,
Sure.
like outside of Nihowdy, like I'm always curious to know like how a lot of Bitcoin source their knowledge and where did they really come into the inception of this digital asset. So in your earliest inception of Bitcoin, whenever you got orange pilled, like what were some literature, what were some books that really like changed the game for you? Or not even just books, because some people don't like reading, whether it was podcasts or educational videos. Were there anything out there that really made you say, okay, I get this, the light bulb went off?
I spent a lot of my time watching YouTube videos, and the Bitcoin University, which is from Matthew Crater. I think he was definitely very instrumental into my own learnings and my own knowledge of learning Bitcoin. That was a pretty big one. I had some personal resources out there, just people I would meet at our local San Jose meetups here for Bitcoin. So that was pretty cool. I got to really pick a lot of people's brains and understand, what makes Bitcoin so much more different from crypto. Again, I think all these other altcoins are kind of grifts. I don't think I think it's disingenuous to say, that they're decentralized. I could go on for hours about that, but I think just surrounding yourself with people who are, within the Bitcoin community, they're really huge advocates of it, and just sort of supplementing that knowledge with, videos you'll see with the Bitcoin University with Matthew Crater. I think that was, a really huge stepping stone, at least in my own personal knowledge and learning more about Bitcoin.
Yeah, most definitely. For me, I would say the books like the Bitcoin Standard, the bullish case on Bitcoin was definitely instrumental. And for me, I definitely listened to a lot of YouTube videos too. But during the time when I really got orange pilled into Bitcoin, it was during the pandemic. Even though I was in the space since 2017, I didn't really dig into it until I got into the pandemic. And I found myself appreciating reading more at that time because it was slower, there was nowhere to go. You didn't have like this massive stimulation of going out or hanging out with friends. It was just kind of like, how do I figure out how to become the a wizard at Bitcoin, right? And of course, at that time, the Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean was kind of going around the Bitcoin circles wildfire, and I kind of got caught up in it as well. So that's just kind of dope to hear how YouTube videos and educational things really helped you to onboard into Bitcoin. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely encourage going to local meetups that are like Bitcoin only. Like, you'll definitely meet some really cool characters out there that have a lot of knowledge. A lot of them are very patient in explaining the concept of Bitcoin and sort of helping you further your education. That's kind of how I sort of refined my knowledge and really solidified, okay, like Bitcoin is really the future here. When I look at Bitcoin, I'm like, this feels like the internet in the 90s for me when I was growing up. I knew that I wanted to be in this industry or at least somewhat like involved with it. When I found out about Bitcoin, I was like, this is amazing.
Most definitely. And James, Um, I feel there is a void in the space right now where, because we're going into this halving and a lot of people are now getting into Bitcoin through the ETFs, how do you think that that's really going to impact your business? Like, do you think that's a good thing? Because on one side, people are looking at the Bitcoin ETF as, oh, great, I have exposure to this asset that's going to make my portfolio look a lot better. But at the same time, the true Bitcoiners know that the Bitcoin ETF is just simply paper Bitcoin. So it's cool until you're trying to get your money out, right? So when you look at Nihowdy, do you think that Nihowdy will get wrapped up in, okay, you guys are using Bitcoin. Like, how legit is this? Like, I need my medication every month or every week. Like, this has to be something that cannot fail. So I always want to think about that in regards to you being like the founder of this company. Like, how do you give customers that reassurance when they hear the word Bitcoin only company in regards to their drugs?
Yeah, so I tell a lot of our customers like Bitcoin is very, very volatile. I will not lie to people's faces and say, this could crash down 80% the next cycle. I really don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But I do believe what Bitcoin represents, this idea of, no one can print anymore, your purchasing power doesn't decrease. The reality is like you can custody and have amazing property assets with Bitcoin compared to any other asset class out there in this world. It solves a huge void, I think, with central banking. And being able to tell people to kind of like think and make their own decisions, I think is the most important part about it. What's actually pretty cool is two of my pharmacy professors actually reached out to me, I want to say over the period of last couple months. And they actually reached out, I was like, hey, should I buy the Bitcoin ETF? And I was actually able to walk them through on actually through Strike. And I was like, no, you can actually just buy Bitcoin itself and hold it within your own custody. And by the way, that's probably much more powerful than the idea of like holding paper Bitcoin to these ETFs. I think what makes these Bitcoin ETFs like so appealable is like it's very easy to access. You can just open your Fidelity account, and everyone usually has a stock or some sort of like brokerage account already. So it's very easy for them to just say, oh, okay, just buy this. But I think being able to educate people and take that extra step, like why is it so important to custody your own assets? Why was Bitcoin even created? In 2008, we had these mortgage-backed security crises. Assets were rehypothecated to the point where like no one knew what they owned. And I think when people sort of realize like, do you really own these stocks that are really in your brokerage account? You don't. They're not titled on your name. They're still titled on their broker. So you're hoping and trusting that this broker doesn't print more shares or doesn't do anything malfeasant. That's a lot of trust in an entity that's almost too big to fail. So I think kind of discussion is always trying to guide people to understand like what is money and what are better ways to look at money if there was a solution to it.
Yes, I agree with that. And
Yeah,
a lot of people, they are in a position now where they're having, back in the early inception of Bitcoin, if you're the people watching, if you guys or gals have been in this space for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you realize it was kind of funneled where there was only a few ways for you to really onboard into Bitcoin. And then when you started to go into the public square, like myself, and talk about it and educate people, everyone looked at you as a lunatic or like this crazy person. Like, what are you talking about? Decentralized money? Yeah, right. Like, sovereign money, what are you talking about? And now because the Bitcoin ETFs are here, it kind of you see everyone just embrace Bitcoin, which is a good thing, but at the same time, it's like you're embracing half the truth. And I love the fact that you've had, your mentors or people that kind of taught you, that have seniority on you. You didn't just say like, just check out the ETF. Like you literally directed them to a direct peer-to-peer digital wallet that they can buy it directly from the miner or directly from the source, because I think as they go through their Bitcoin journey, they're going to realize that, okay, James actually helped me out. It's a little bit more technical, it might be a little bit harder for me to understand setting up KYC and all these other different things. But I think ultimately, over the long term, when they get to a place where they're starting to put things in cold storage, they're starting to realize, like, okay, I might have to sell some Bitcoin. It's going to be 1,000 times easier to do it through the way that you approach them with it versus going through the ETF, where now you have to talk to an investment manager. You have to wait for 5 to 7 business days for it to be sold off. And it's a lot of people aren't realizing that that's what's going to happen with the ETFs. Not to knock them, but this is not financial advice, of course, but weigh your options and really like talk to people that have been entrenched in this space for a long time, such as James. And I think that you'll get a lot of good insight from him and from others in this space that know about Bitcoin.
for sure. I think the last comment I would add is, there's so many problems with central banking. You're trusting these people who manage money and the supply of it to not print any more money. And if they do, you're hoping they don't print into oblivion. Your monetary energy is reflected by all the work you do. You go work for an employer, you get paid, I don't know, say $50 an hour. Well, you want to make sure that $50 an hour is worth $50 an hour for the rest of your life, or that $50 is worth $50 for the rest of your life. I do remember running this sort of experiment, but if you assume a 2% inflation rate, $50 will turn into $25, which is half roughly in about 30 years or so. I think most economists will say, inflation is a good thing. But I mean, I totally disagree with that. There's no way that makes a great system. But yeah, just kind of a rambling thought I had.
Most definitely. So James, man, this interview has been fire, man. I really enjoyed having this conversation about Nihowdy and you being a pharmacist and kind of getting into the space as a radical and someone that really wants to change the perception of drug rebates. I think that that is really commendable. I'm always going to salute you and support you. But before you go, I think you mentioned this before, but give people your social media handles. Tell people about the future endeavors of Nihowdy if there is any, and let the audience know what you plan to do in the next few months, weeks, and years before we go.
Sure. Well, to reach me, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is James Wong, PharmD. I'm mostly just active on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is The Simple Doctor. Our website's Nihowdy.com. We're hoping to expand from 35,000 pharmacies to 70,000. We're going to be releasing our second product, Meowdy. That's a play on words for drug rebates for pet prescriptions. So we have a lot of really cool things that we're sort of building in the background. And definitely, we've been rebating back Bitcoin since it was 20,000. Our milestone is going to be coming up soon when Bitcoin hits 70,000. I think some of our customers will have been able to solve 10% of the purchase price with Bitcoin. So again, I think we have some really cool data to show, and we'll be releasing it, I think, in the next coming weeks for people to see. But I do believe Bitcoin is more than just a speculative asset. It's a tool to solve out-of-pocket prescription costs, and definitely, I invite anyone to reach out to talk about it or discuss about it more if they want to learn about drug rebates.
Yes. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, James Wong, another great episode of the Bitcoin Source. Thank you, brother, for being on the show. Have a good one.
Thanks, Dottie, for having me.